So I was just kind of playing around, checking out Catholic podcasts, and there's one, I wish I could find it. I can't find it now. But several months ago, I was listening to it, and there's this nun that received this lifetime award for all her work, and this nun was in her 90s, which just amazes me. And her story, I just love the interview. It was something, she got an award for being a light for justice or something like that. But she had this great story where she grew up in Belgium during the Nazi occupation, which is amazing. And she was just a little girl. And she said, in my family, we were loved down to the very bone. And we're Catholic, and we're filled with love, and the Nazis came in. And my father says, we look fear right in the eye. And he told his children, you will not be afraid. You'll stand up to this. So even as a little girl, she would try and put sugar in the gas tanks of Nazis, which just like, holy cow. And then she becomes a nun, and she works actually in South America and the United States. And throughout her life, she always took these really tough assignments in some of the poorest parts of the world with violence. And I loved her interview because she's in her 90s and still working. And she has this great light sense of humor where, she's falling apart, but she's still working. And she said all her life, what she's tried to promote is really the beloved community. The beloved community is this theological idea that we're one family. We need to love each other as brothers and sisters. And like Martin Luther King, if his theological idea was the same thing, starting the beloved community. So in the Gospel of John, that's part of the theology, the beloved community, where we gather together in wonderful unity. And I like how she fought injustice and cruelty in the world simply by having people come together in this beloved community. And she, despite years from little girl fighting the Nazis to today, I think she works in New Mexico, she's not bitter, even though really she's seen the worst of life. She's light and happy, laughs a lot. And she reminded me of that Hafez poem, where Hafez describes his relationship with God. This is a great poem. I love this, where he said, my relationship with God is like this. Like two giant fat men sitting in a tiny boat that keep bumping into each other and laughing and laughing. And I like that poem because, I like the idea of the boat. And, it's dangerous and you could fall over, but you can't help but laughing. And she has this lightness to her, even though she's really this justice for life warrior for justice and life. And when she says beloved community, that's a theological idea that actually is slightly hidden in the gospel. Because when John the Baptist says, behold the Lamb of God, that's a whole theology. It's not random. And I want to explain to you how the beloved community relates to the Lamb of God. But the Lamb of God is this theological idea. And actually, when you get to Exodus, it's this twist in Hebrew, this great surprise, where you find out, who created all life? The Lamb of God. The Lamb of God created all life. So Lamb of God is connected with life. And then when you get to Abraham, God makes this promise to Abraham that one day God will send the Lamb of God and we can be a family. And in the Hebrew, it's really interesting. In the Hebrew, God says it can be translated one of two ways. God promises to send the Lamb of God himself or to send himself as a Lamb of God. It's a little ambiguous. And, for centuries, it was just translated, God would send the Lamb of God himself. We Catholics, we interpret it, no, it meant God will send himself as a Lamb of God. Then we can look at each other as brothers and sisters. The beloved community will start. So for centuries, the Jews have waited for God to send the Lamb of God. And when Jews blow the shofar, a ram's horn, It's a call to prayer. That's what it means to us. But it's also this call to God, reminding God, you promised to send the Lamb of God to us. We're still waiting. And so that's Abraham. And then when you get to Passover in Exodus, remember, the people had been enslaved. Their life was worth nothing, not even their own. They were slaves. And Egypt was killing their children. Egypt at the time had the greatest military force ever. So God says he's going to free them, but he's not going to free them by sending an army. He's going to free them from the most powerful military at the time by having them share a meal. That's a real backwards thinking. And then God promises, you share in the meal of the Lamb of God, not only will you be freed from Egypt, but the Lamb of God is even more powerful than death itself. And Moses, this is a great speech, when he talks about the Lamb of God, he tells the people, you gather together as a family and you must eat the Lamb of God and you will be set free. Lamb of God is connected with freedom. You eat the Lamb of God, you'll be set free from slavery. And then he turns to the people reading the Bible or telling the story. And he says, and you people, when you eat the Lamb of God, you'll be one with us. The Lamb of God not only frees, but it unites us together. But that's not the Lamb of God that was sent by God, so they're still waiting. And then when you get to the Promised Land, God said, it's called the law of the Tamid. And what it is, this gets a little technical, but at 9 a.m. every morning, the priest would select a spotless lamb and sacrifice it. And then the shofar is blown and the gates to the temple are open to welcome the people. So that starts every day. At the end of every day, at 3 p.m., once again, the priest selects a spotless lamb and sacrifices it. And that concludes when the end of the day. And the idea is that everything we do in our life, all our sacrifices, our prayers, it's really directed at the Lamb of God. And if you notice, what time did Jesus accept the cross? 9 a.m. What time did Jesus die? 3 p.m. Jesus is the Tamid, where everything is pointed. Creation started off with the Lamb of God, and here's the twist. Creation results in the Lamb of God. Or if you go to the book of Revelation has this view of heaven, and encircled around the altar of heaven is people of, quote, every language, people of every race, language, and way of life, all gathered around the altar, and on the altar is a Lamb of God, but not just our human beings. There's angels and seraphim and tetramorphs, and if you're wondering what those are, I don't know. But, well, we don't know. But in heaven, there's more than just us, human beings. And I love this. The Lamb of God not only gave all life, but it keeps all life in relationship to each other. So what they're waiting for is the Lamb of God. In the same way, a priest would point out the Lamb of God. Think about this. John the Baptist, his mother came from a priestly family. His father did too. He's a pure blood priest. John the Baptist is a priest. And John the Baptist is a priest that finally, after centuries of waiting, points and says, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. The idea there is that our whole life should be pointed towards the Lamb of God. Everything we do is pointed to the great feast of the Lamb of God, where all of us would be united together. Think about this 90-year-old Belgian nun. Even into her 90s, laughingly, she's just trying to point everybody to the great feast of the Lamb of God by creating community. That's where our lives are directed. So I love the first reading, which Chase, I know you're sitting somewhere over there. You did a great job reading that first reading. Nice and strong and clear. But did you notice when God says, it is too little for you just to be a servant of God? I love that. It is too small, too tiny to say, you know what though, I'm a moral person. I've obeyed all the rules and regulations. That's so small. Your life should be bigger than just saying, I'm moral. Big deal. That's boring. No offense. Now, let me get this here. I'm all for morality. most of the time. But it's boring. Just say, well, I've never committed any major sins. Our life is to be pointed at something great, much greater. And that is the Lamb of God. So God says it's too little just to be a servant of God. You're supposed to be a light to draw all people in. The lost, the broken, that's what, anyhow, that's what it means. We're supposed to be this light that draws community together. And it points to the Lamb of God. So I love this. And the same way John the Baptist says, it's said in heaven too, behold the Lamb of God. We do that today to say, we're rehearsing heaven. We're rehearsing our lives, where our lives don't point to just us. It points to something greater. The great feast where all life will be held in relationship and love with each other. Hopefully, when we reach 90, we're like the Belgian nun. Yes, we're moral, but with great humor, how we change the world, fight injustice and cruelty, how we do it is not, with more protests. We do it by establishing the beloved community. That's what the Lamb of God gives us. And so, together, let us stand and profess our faith.